Good afternoon, class. Today we'll be getting a brief introduction about what is ecology as a subject. I trust most of you would have researched about ecology before enrolling into this class. Basically, it's a sub-branch of science. And more importantly, it is a sub-branch of life science. So let's go ahead and see what are some of the important vocab terms in ecology and what ecology is. All right, so the first important vocab term is biosphere. You are required to know what it means. The biosphere consists of all life on Earth and all parts of the Earth in which life exists, including land, water, and atmosphere. So basically, biosphere includes all life and parts of Earth where life is found. So it is basically studying our living planet. All right, the science of ecology. Ecology is the scientific study of interactions among and between organisms and their physical environment. So let's take an example. Let's take the example of humans. Humans are obviously organisms or living organisms. And let's see how humans interact with another living organism, and let's say deer. And how deer interact back with humans. Now, humans hunt deer for food, and the construction and the development by humans affect the habitat or the land on which deer live. This was an example of interaction between organisms, but ecology also consists of interaction between living organisms and their physical environment. So let's see how humans interact with one of the physical environment. Let's say air. Now, human activities can lead to changing the constitution of air, leading to air pollution. That is how humans have an effect on air. How does air affect humans or interact with humans? Well, the same air in which, due to the human activities like industrialization and vehicles and stuff like that, it pollutes the air, the same polluted air, when humans breathe it, they develop certain breathing illnesses. That is how they interact. So ecology is basically the scientific study of interactions among and between organisms and also their physical environment. Interactions within the biosphere produces a web of interdependence between organisms and the environment in which they live. So if you see here in the example that we were talking about, if you see, it creates a web-like structure. Humans are interacting with deer. Well, you can say humans are also interacting with other animals and land. They're interacting with air. Animals are interacting with air. So if you see here, they've given a nice diagram of how a web of interdependence is created. So if you see, the blue dots represent carnivores, basically meat-eating animals. The green dot represents herbivores, which is basically plant-eating animals. And the orange dot represents primary producer, which is basically plants themselves. So you see, we start with algae over here. Krill, which is a herbivore, feeds on algae. And krill, which is then eaten by penguins and also squids and other animals. They are then eaten by seals, which are eaten by whales. So if you see, this whole interaction produces a web. All right. Right, so let's look at the levels of organization. The organization levels start with an organism, which is a part of a population. Many populations come together to make a community, which is many communities come together to become an ecosystem, which then many ecosystems get together to make a biome, and many biomes together make a biosphere. All right, so ecology is organizing the living things in their environment. All right, so let's look at an organism. A deer is an organism. Individual living things are called organisms. So a deer can be an organism, a human can be an organism, a cat can be an organism. When many organisms of one species living in one area come together, that's called a population. So we can say human population in Beloit, that is a population. Population of cats in Beloit, that is a population, because cats are all belonging to the same species. Now, when many different populations living in one area get together, it's called a community. You see here, these are very important vocab terms and you're required to know that. So let's go over it again. Organism is individual living thing. When many organisms of, you see here, many organisms of the same species come together, that makes a population. And when many different populations living in one area come together, that's called a community. So this is a community. You see there's a population of deer, there's a population of zebras, and then I think there are ostriches, and then, yep, there are different populations coming together. A community together with non-living environment. So this is a community of different populations which, when taken into consideration with the non-living environment like water, air, land, etc., it makes an ecosystem. So this entire thing is an ecosystem with the population of plants, population of zebra, the grass, the land, the air, the water, and all the ecosystems on the earth come together to make the biosphere. All right. Okay. Right. So, third is pop. On your worksheet. So what is a population? A population is a group of individuals that belong to the same species. Alright, so let's look at the next vocab term, which is a population. A population is a group of individuals that belong to the same species and live in the same area. So what are the two important criteria for a group of individuals to be called a population? One, they have to be from the same species, and two, they have to live in the same area. So if I say a group of dogs, cats, and deer, does that make a population? Does this group make a population? No. And why not? Because they are not from the same species, because they do not meet the first criteria. All right, so let's get rid of this first. Okay. But if I say a group of 50 dogs, does that make a population? So let's look at the first criteria. Are they from the same species? Yes, they are from the same species. But do they live in the same area? Well, it's not mentioned. So maybe not. Maybe or maybe not. Right. But if I say 50 dogs, a group of 50 dogs living in Beloit, does that make a population? Well, yes, because they're from the same species and they are also living in the same area. So yes, that makes it a population. All right, let's go on to the next slide. All right, so on the next slide, the vocab term is community. We have to understand what is a community. A community is assemblage of different populations that live together in a defined area. So let's look at an example. Well, they've given some examples over here. The population of um, plants or trees, population of fishes, population of bacteria, population of insects and birds living in Rock County. They have to live in the same area. So this entire thing is a community. All right. All right. Levels of organization that we are studying. The next vocab term is ecosystem. Ecosystem is all the organisms or all the communities that live in a place together with the physical environment. So basically an ecosystem consists of living communities and the physical environment, which would be the air, water, land, etc. So if you look here, let's talk about Rock County. The ecosystem of Rock County would include, firstly, the living communities, all the living communities that would include fishes, humans, deer, even microorganisms, and then the physical environment, which is the water, the air, everything in Rock County. That would be the ecosystem of Rock County. All right, so in the next slide, the next vocab term is biome. What is a biome? A group of ecosystems that share similar climates. So it's basically a group of ecosystems that have the similar climates and typical organisms. Interesting. It's an ecosystem, which means it has organisms, it has communities, and physical environment. But then, to make a biome, a group of ecosystems have to have similar climates. So can I say that Africa here and let's say France here, the ecosystems of Africa and France make up a biome? No, because firstly, they don't have similar climates. If you see, Africa has tropical climate. Also, France or Europe has temperate climate. The climates are different. The other thing is that even if the climates are same, they have to have the same kind of typical organisms. So can I say that, well, this is Middle East, right here. So can I say that the biomes of Middle East and top Eastern Africa, those ecosystems together make a biome? Yes, because they share similar climates and they have typically same kind of organisms living in them. Right. Biosphere, our entire planet with all its organisms and physical environments is called the biosphere. Earth is a biosphere. All right, so this is talking about Earth. What about, what if we find another planet somewhere? Let's call it planet XYZ. It has water, it has air, it has land, soil, plus it has some living organisms on it. Will that planet XYZ, will that planet make a biosphere? Yes, very much. That planet, along with all its physical environment and living organism, will make a biosphere. All right, let's go on. Right. Ecosystems. The biosphere's ecosystems are called ecosystem. You can look here and see here that in an ecosystem you have the different populations and communities and all the physical environments like air, water, soil, along with different communities in the same area. That is called an ecosystem. All right. All right. So let's look at what we should be knowing more about ecosystems. All ecosystems must have a constant source of energy. Very important. They must have a constant source of energy. Usually it's the sun, most of the times. There are also times when a sun is not the constant source of energy in some ecosystems, and we'll study about that later. But right now, let's take the example of sun. They must have a constant source of energy, and they must have certain recycle systems or cycles of system to reuse the raw materials. Like we studied about water cycle back in physical science class. Well, some of you might have also studied about nitrogen and carbon cycle. So there are the same raw materials. You see, the water is limited, but we just recycle it as a ecosystem, and that is very important. So any ecosystem and every ecosystem must have a constant source of energy to survive and a cycle or a system that has developed to reuse and utilize the raw materials by recycling them. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Again, important vocab words: biotic and abiotic factors. So what are the biotic factors or abiotic factors in an ecosystem in a biosphere? The biological or living influences on organisms are called the biotic factors. The physical, non-living components of an ecosystem are called the abiotic factors. So let's look at the abiotic factors first. They have to be non-living and they have to be physical. Can you think of some? Well, I can think of some. Air, it's non-living, it's physical. Water, soil, land, well, it's the same thing. Rocks, isn't it? Oh, also the sun, the sunlight. Well, it's very much part. The sunlight is very much part of our ecosystem. It's a constant source of energy, and so forth. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Biotic factors. All right, let's go into more detail about biotic factors. A biotic factor is any living part of the environment, any part that is living, with which an organism might interact, including animals, plants, mushrooms, bacteria, coral reef. Right. So basically, animal can be a biotic factor because animals do interact with plants. They also do interact with mushrooms. Some animals do eat mushrooms. They also interact with bacteria. Similarly, bacteria interacts back with plants, animals. So biotic factor is the living part. Bio. Do you see that? It means living. Very simple. Again, the next term, abiotic factors, we just studied about it. Abio, which is not bio or not living. Abiotic factors. A for absence. Absence of life, abiotic. An abiotic factor is any non-living part of environment such as sunlight, heat, precipitation, humidity, wind, water currents, or soil type, etc. in an ecosystem. Let's go on to the next. Primary producers. Okay. Primary means major, main. Producer means they produce something. Usually they are the plants. For most life on Earth, sunlight is the ultimate energy source. Plants use the sunlight along with other abiotic factors to produce the food they need. Plants are the primary producers. Let's go slide. Plants, algae, and certain bacteria capture energy from sunlight or chemicals and convert it into forms that living cells can use, basically food. These organisms are also called autotrophs. Auto means by themselves. Autotrophs. They are making their food by themselves. Primary producers are also called autotrophs, and the examples are plants, algae, and certain bacteria. Let's go on to the next slide. Autotrophs are also called primary producers. We just learned about it. And primary producers are the only biotic factors in an ecosystem that can harness or capture solar energy through the process of photosynthesis. Right. The best known and the most common primary producers harness solar energy through the process of photosynthesis. We just saw that. Photosynthesis usually involves the energy from sun, water, and carbon dioxide to make carbohydrates and oxygen. I think most of you have studied about it in lower classes. So they are just using all the abiotic factors to make food. Life without light. Is it possible? Yep, it is very much possible. Let's see how. Deep sea ecosystems depend on primary producers that harness chemical energy and not sun. Their primary source of energy is the chemical energy from inorganic molecules such as hydrogen sulfide found there, and they use this chemical energy to produce carbohydrates by a process called chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis. They're using chemicals and hence chemosynthesis. They're not using photo or light and hence not photosynthesis. Consumers. So producers are doing their job of producing food for themselves by using either the solar or the chemical energy. But consumers are organisms that acquire energy from other organisms by ingesting or eating them in some or the other way, and they are known as heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are also called consumers. So if you see here, they've given you an example of a tiger that is feeding on a deer. So tiger is a heterotroph or a consumer. Let's go on to the next. Types of consumers. Consumers are basically heterotrophs that eat or ingest other organisms. Carnivores. Important vocab term. I think most of you are well aware with what carnivores are. They kill and eat other animals. There are carnivores like snakes, dogs, cats, and giant river otters. There are others like leopards, lions. Types of consumers. The second important vocab term is scavengers. Like a king vulture, they are the animals that consume the carcasses, dead bodies. Carcass means dead body or decaying bodies of other animals that have been killed by predators or have died of any other causes. So scavengers are also types of consumers. Then comes decomposers, another important vocab term. Bacteria, fungi, and some other kind of decomposers are also there. They feed by chemically breaking down organic matter. Oh, what does that mean? Well, the decay caused by decomposers is a part of process that produces detritus, small pieces of dead and decaying plant and animal remains. So, well, there's a dead body. Let's make a dead body of a little cute little cat here. Okay, so this is a dead body of a cat. Ideally, some predator would have eaten it. But let's say they failed to eat it. The dead body is there. Then we would think something like a vulture, a scavenger, would have scavenged or eaten on the dead body. Let's say the predator did eat a part of it, and the vulture got a part of it, but then the remaining part of the body is still there. What will happen is the bacteria and fungi and my other microorganisms would attack it, and they would release some chemicals and chemically break down the organic matter, and they would use it. They would feed on it, and that is would lead to the decaying bodies of plants and animals. Types of consumers. Another vocab term is herbivores. Herbivores obtain their energy and nutrients by eating plants, leaves, roots, or seeds, or fruits. Basically, herbivores are feeding on primary producers. Primary producers. Common herbivores include cow, deer, caterpillar. Omnivores. Interesting term. Omnivores are animals whose diet naturally include a different variety of food that can be both plant and animal. Humans, bears, and pigs are omnivore. So, an omnivore would eat a plant or an animal or both. Detritivores, another vocab term. They are like giant earthworms. They feed on detritus particles which are broken down by organic material after chewing or grinding them into smaller pieces. Detritivores commonly digest decomposers that live on and in the detritus particles. Okay, so what were the decomposers we discussed? If you remember, we discussed microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. Bacteria and fungi. So earthworm basically eats or ingests that broken down organic material or detritus which contain these organisms. So it is basically feeding on these microorganisms. Okay, food chain. Important vocab term, food chain. A series of steps in which organisms transfer energy by eating and being eaten is called a food chain. So algae, which is a primary producer, makes its own food by using the sunlight, is then eaten by flagfish, which is in turn eaten by bassfish, which is then eaten by anhinga, which is a kind of a bird, which is then eaten by an alligator. This creates a chain, one thing being eaten by another, then that thing being eaten by another. It makes a chain. That is known as the chain of food or food chain. Food chains. Energy flows through an ecosystem in one-way stream from primary producers to various consumers. Notice that the arrow depicts the energy flow. Okay, so food chain is basically also not just a chain of food, but also a chain of energy flow. When algae makes its own food from, let's say, sunlight, it traps that energy. Now, that energy from algae, when the flagfish eats the algae, it's also getting the energy. So, energy is also flowing in the direction of the food chain. Food web. All the food chains and ecosystems is called a food web because it makes a web-like structure, and each step is called a trophic level. Each step is called a trophic level. Okay, so if you see, let's start with the plants and algae. Plants and algae and leaves and seeds and other things which are producers are being eaten by raccoons. They're also being eaten by deer. They're also being eaten by crayfish, and they're also being eaten by bacteria. See? It's not a chain anymore. It's not a single chain like this. It becomes a web. It becomes more complicated, more complex. Now, the raccoon is basically also a omnivore. It's eating crayfish too. And if you look at the algae over here, which is a producer, is being eaten by flagfish, shrimp, and also by bacteria. Bacteria are being eaten by worms, and which are in turn being eaten by crayfish, killfish, bass. See, it makes a web known as food web.